Well, what I want to do today is go over. I'm basically going to practice a presentation that I give every now and then that I've updated, all about what I would call platform as a product, which is just, I don't know, a way of thinking about platform engineering, or the way that you run, your stack of software that your developers use, whatever. Maybe I should just wait till the presentation, till I go over what it is. That would be wise as well. So I have a webinar coming up for that pretty soon, later this week. And that is why I am practicing it. That sound was a little distracting. There we go. I need to turn it way down. Anyhow, so I've got the slides loaded up here. Before I start the formal thing, I'll just give you an overview of what they are. You can see they're going to be a little weird because I uploaded them here to StreamYard. And, anytime you upload ooh, that one looks especially terrible. It kind of messes around with it. But whatever. It's just like a little practice. So you might have seen me give some of these before, some of this stuff. We'll see. It's been a while since I've been live streaming, so this seemed like a good reason to do one for the old Tanzu Talk live stream. All right. I'm having my Coca-Cola European style. I left it in the red wine section of the wine fridge, so it's not quite as cool as I would like it to be, but it's fine. It does the trick. Should I put my little head on here? That's fun. Look at this. That's kind of, I guess this is if you're doing the newscaster style, but I'll do it this way. All right. Where'd this go? A little hot today here in Amsterdam. So let me see. Let me note down what time I'm starting at. Basically, we'll say 2:30 in. Well, thanks for joining me today. I want to go over what has come to be known by many different names. I think of it as platform as a product because here in Tanzu land and at Pivotal before that, we used to call the concept of how you think about running the infrastructure that your developers use to run their applications, the thing that they have in production. We would call that platform as a product. And I'll get into, there's a very important aspect of it, a product part, if you will, the way you product manage it that really brings in that as a product. Now, people nowadays will also call this platform engineering. It's kind of in the same space as of thinking about how you do DevOps things and site reliability engineering. All of those words mean a specific set of things, but it's kind of in that same area of I'm running infrastructure that my developers are using to run their applications on. And the platform as a product concept and platform engineering as well, it actually adds another dimension into that. Which I think helps the original goal of running the software and having, uptime and latency, having the performance you need in production a lot more effective. So why is this of interest nowadays? Well, I mean, it's always of interest because many organizations, particularly the large ones that I spend time studying and talking with, they write a tremendous amount of their own software that runs their business for them. Whether it's internal-facing applications or external ones. I'll get into a couple of examples here. But we're at the very beginning, maybe not the very beginning, we're at the beginning of a shift to having Kubernetes be a very important part of that stack, the stack of software that's used to run software that organizations write and use to run their organization. And, if you look at Kubernetes is great. It provides like a way of normalizing, that is kind of creating a standard around what the infrastructure looks like. And that means you get a lot more efficiencies in how you manage your infrastructure. It tends to run better. You have a lot more portability, all sorts of benefits that people have. But as you've no doubt heard, I think of it as kind of like this paradox of Kubernetes, where over the years and even now, there's been a lot of complaints about Kubernetes, right? People talk about how complex it is, how you've got to use a bunch of like YAML to configure it. Just people sort of, especially us vendors, to be fair, because we're interested in helping you, we like to talk about how it's not as simple as downloading something and just getting it up and running. And you see that in surveys here. The StreamYard's upload has kind of messed up the slides, but whatever. Where you see people going, this is for the past 3 years of the State of Kubernetes survey that we do, and you can see things that have concerned them. Now, I think, what is encouraging to see is this one, the second one over here, the skills gap has been going down as people have been getting more educated about learning it, as Kubernetes and the ecosystem around it has added more focus on usability and ease of use around it and things like that. And then also just as the technology is adopted and used more and more, we as kind of an overall IT industry and community understand how to use it. So that part's improving. I think it's interesting, curious also what you see is that there's a rise in people concerned about security, right? And I think that also is attributed to just more and more people using it. So the more mainstream a new technology becomes, the more there's concerns about security because it's something that everyone's interested in. But you can see this reflected in the surveys, the kind of complaining that people have about the complexity of Kubernetes. And yet what you see is that everyone wants it, right? Like this is from another survey, the Cloud Native Computing Foundation survey, but you can find this in analyst surveys, our own State of Kubernetes surveys. Anecdotally, there is this, and I've seen this over the past 5 years, definitely, as Kubernetes has risen in prominence in large organizations, that most large organizations, you could say most everyone wants to use Kubernetes. They're curious about it. They're building out their strategy for how they're building and running their applications. As this survey shows you, there's a lot of intentions around getting it up running. So we have this kind of complaining about complexity and complaining about the difficulty of Kubernetes, but however, coupled with this strong desire to actually use it and fitting into the plans that people have. Now, going back to our survey, I think one of the reasons that you see this is that as Kubernetes is getting more and more mainstream, right, kind of getting into that early majority, if you think about the diffusion of innovation, to look at another kind of past 3 years of our surveys, what you see is that there are great benefits, improvements people have had, as you would expect from something like Kubernetes that is really focused on being performant and making sure that you use your resources as tightly as possible. You do see that there's better resource utilization. That's gone up, right? Like in a noticeable way. You see that you get these other benefits that people kind of are shooting for. It helps you with your cloud strategy, your multi-cloud stuff. Again, by providing, the great thing about it is it has one, as Kubernetes people would say, API, or one way of thinking about configuring and sort of managing the infrastructure that you have instead of a huge variety across whatever cloud or private cloud stuff you have. It's got a more regular way of doing it, which I think is where a lot of the power of Kubernetes comes from. But if you move down, you can see that the software development related things, the things that you do with your custom written applications, have actually been decreasing. In particular, this one about shortening your software development cycle, which I use as, it's not the best or perfect, but the shorter your development cycles are, that is the time it takes to get your software out the door, generally the better that you're doing with software. Again, that's not perfect. Sometimes you could have short development cycles and you could be doing poorly. But generally, that's what people are aiming for, is that we want to have faster cycles so that we can get features out the door quickly. And you can see that over the years, that has very noticeably decreased, right? So Kubernetes, even though it has these great infrastructure benefits that people are realizing, it's not quite delivering on the developer benefits that people are looking for in this survey, and then also anecdotally from just talking with people. And the reason that is, I think, is because you do need to have a platform as a product, or platform engineering plan in place, a platform as well. And I think that's because what you have with Kubernetes, this is supposed to be animated, but it's taken out the animated GIF. Just do a little blinking cursor there. Is that for all the benefits that Kubernetes has, what you get if you've perfectly installed it and got it up and running, you've set up your management, you've done your security risk assessment, you've done all this stuff, all that you get is a blinking cursor. Now, I'm being a little, is reductive the right word? Simplistic about it. But from an application developer standpoint, from the standpoint of now we need to worry about developing and running our applications, this is what you end up with a well put together Kubernetes thing. Even if you as a developer can request your own cluster, get things set up for you, do the self-service dreams that you have. Now you need to actually start doing the job of having an application, figuring out how it's all configured and wired together to fit the kind of architecture that you have in your application. It's the equivalent of like, opening up a fresh laptop and just opening the terminal and having a blinking cursor ready for you to do something with. And that's where this notion of needing a platform comes into place, and then needing the methodology and the technology around it as platform as a product to help you get beyond this blinking cursor that you have. And I think as this notion of platform as a product and platform engineering is introduced into more and more large organizations, that's where we'll see kind of a reversal, or we'll see a correction to, we'll get back to Kubernetes helping out with shorter development cycles for more mainstream people as it spreads more and more, and helping out with other things like, moving large applications over and things like that. So let's look at what this platform as a product notion is. And to get to there, I think it's good to understand why we're shooting for this, right? Like I mentioned that having shorter release cycles for your software is kind of a proxy or an indicator that I use. I get confused about leading and trailing. I guess it's a trailing indicator because your release frequency is something that happened in the past. You can't necessarily see, like I said, I get confused about them, but never mind. But let me give you just a quick example about what the goal is of getting good at software, right? Like why you're changing the way that your development team, your product team is doing software, why you're even thinking about putting something like Kubernetes in place and thinking about how do we change the way we do operations and infrastructure to support that. And this is a story from a few years ago from a customer that we worked with in the food service industry. And what they not only deliver food, but they'll manage kitchens for you. So you can completely outsource your campus kitchen, kind of like a large kitchen, whether it's at a university or a corporate setting. They'll do everything for you. And the way that they wanted to improve their business is they wanted to focus on, kind of like with Kubernetes, having more consistency and standardization in the way that recipes were followed in their kitchens. Instead of, and you can think about how that's more efficient, that you've come up with the efficient way of doing something. It actually has a lot of parallels to how you would run IT. And if people follow the recipe, the run book, if you remember that term, the way of doing things, it optimizes on ingredients used, kind of on flavor, I would hope, and kind of the whole preparation way of going about things, right? So you want people to follow the recipes. And then with that consistency, kind of matching to the recipes that you have, that also increases your customer experience, of course, that you've come up with a good recipe and you've spread that out to all the different kitchens that you have, that kind of follows the better recipes. And when you have updates to send out, like, you want the people to follow that. So anyways, the way that this was done was through paper recipes, right? I like to imagine that there were 3-ring binders and they would get sent things and put it in there. So in order to, in this kind of digital transformation thing that they were going through, they wanted to improve the business by improving the software, by introducing an app, introducing software that would help out. And as part of that, they were improving the way that they were doing software. So the original idea of this company was that, well, of course, if we're paper, we need to digitize it and move the recipes to an iPad. Then we can update them. People can, check off things they're doing in the iPad. It's what you would do. You would use a tablet. I don't know if it was Android or iOS. Now, normally in a project-based way of doing software, the requirements, that would have been the goal. The requirements would have been written up. You would have wireframes done. A development team would go off and work on this. You would, your infrastructure people would get involved at some point to kind of spec out the infrastructure needed. It would be deployed to production, and then finally users would use it. However, because this team was doing things in more of a product way of doing things, if you're familiar with that distinction, instead the team took a very product way of doing this, and they said, all right, that sounds like, I understand your business outcomes, optimize costs, and focus on customer experience. And I understand what you think would be a good idea for us to look at, but we're going to go and study the working environment. So they got up early in the morning, they went and observed the kitchen staff, what they were doing, and they found that what they did is they focused a lot on measuring the temperature of food, measuring mayonnaise and raw chicken. And, of course you do this to make sure that it's at a safe temperature so that you don't give people food poisoning and the food doesn't ruin. Kind of a really bad customer experience if you've ever had food poisoning. And of course, there's a compliance and audit aspect to that. You have health inspectors come and make sure you've been tracking this. But this was also done in a paper form. And the team found out that it was taking up a huge amount of time. And of course, being in a paper form, it's also error prone. You've got to keep those sheets of paper, and it's hard to kind of go through them because they're paper. Anyhow, so what the team thought, they came up with a theory that the best way at the first thing to do that would be the best way to achieve these goals of optimizing the business and customer experience would instead be to digitize, to write an app around that temperature monitoring rather than going in first and digitizing the recipes. So they went and did that, and they did some early experiments to validate their theory that this would be the best idea. And sure enough, as you would imagine with the story I've chosen to tell you, it did optimize the time. It freed up a tremendous amount of time for the kitchen staff to focus on the quality of the food and following recipes. And it also made the actual process of measuring things much better, right? It was easier to track because they did some IoT stuff. It was much more accurate, and so forth and so on, right? So, and they were able to do this because they were taking a product approach, because they could deliver soft more frequently, and because they were supported by a platform that enabled the developers to focus, just like the kitchen staff, on what's important, on their application code instead of infrastructure things. So keep this in mind of like this goal of working on like a weekly release cycle where the developers just focus on the application and the problems that they're solving, that they have enough time to go at 4 a.m. in the morning to the kitchen and study people instead of worrying about configuring their pipelines and configuring packaging and all the infrastructure stuff. They're solely focused on that product, that application that they're doing. And this is the kind of application that platform as a product is supporting, right? All the way up to the actual business goals that you have, or nonprofit goals if you don't care about that. And so let's think about if you are an operations and infrastructure person, someone who is in charge of Kubernetes, or as we'll get into, kind of like the tooling and the infrastructure around that application. Again, apologies for the slide if you're watching this recording. I mean, you must be watching the recording if you hear me talk, so whatever. But this is a very simplified sort of process that people go through, right? You can think of it as we and many other people think of kind of loops that people go through, that kind of the idea that you might have for a feature in production all the way to someone, a user, using that feature. And you know, you've got your outer loop of all the, that would actually be a better visualization. I should find that. You've got an inner loop that developers have that basically is all of the stuff that when a developer is sitting down and typing, whether they're working solo or pairing up with someone, that work that goes on inside of a release, the actual development and doing things. And then there's the outer loop where there's all the work once the application, the code is done, getting it into production and managing it and things like that. So this is my simplified version of it, but you can see that there's essentially a pipeline, right? You know, you can think of it as loops or whatever, but there's a lot that goes on from thinking about the coding that you're going to do all the way to a person using it and then going back in, right? And observing how people are using the features in your app and improving it, coming up with new things. And I really think that a lot of what is in platform as a product this is kind of the product, so to speak, that you're working on, right? You're always studying who your customers are, developers here, and you're focusing on how you're going to improve it and make it better. So this is what you're working on when you're doing platform engineering and platform as a product. This is the end goal that you have, the product and the customers of the developers. So what you do with, just as a point of reference, right? When you're looking at that blinking cursor, Kubernetes, right? There's a tremendous amount of things, as people like to point out all the time, right? Kubernetes is a platform for building platforms. And there are all sorts of components for developers and integrations that you put in there that help enable that pipeline, right? And you can see this is the platform that we put together, the Tanzu application platform, which you can run on top of any type of Kubernetes that you want in public or private cloud or edge. You can do air-gapped, whatever you may like. You can also run it on Tanzu Kubernetes for operators, kind of at the bottom there if you need a Kubernetes distro, so to speak, running. But you can see how what's layered on top of there is not only the kind of runtime environment, the orchestration that Kubernetes has, the security layers, but also what's included in this product, this platform that you're supporting, this platform as a product are the tools that developers use. What nowadays is called a secure software supply chain. That is the build pipeline of how you not only automate the building of the code, the running of the tests, but also the configuration and packaging it for the various stages, whether it's in testing or performance testing or staging or actually production on its own. But also where you get a lot of the security and governance benefits of being able to track what components are in there. Not only generating your bill of materials, but generating where it's been deployed, who authorized it, and therefore knowing when security issues come up, what you can go fix. But there's also all the integrated, as we used to call it back in my day, middleware and development frameworks. In our world, there's a lot of .NET frameworks that we put in there based on steel toe and kind of the cloud frameworks in there, but also a lot of things. If you're doing Java, we have Spring integrated in there. All the various things from exciting stuff like batch job management to the API management that comes with Spring Cloud and things like that. But then there's also, if you're really going for that idea of developers having a lot of ownership and responsibility of their code from the DevOps world, you also want to have a view of what the application looks like in production or wherever you may be running it. Not only for debugging during development, but also, doing hunting down bugs and bug fixes in production as well. And then finally, there's a lot of methodology and management and monitoring that goes around it that as you might find in the Tanzu mission control and observability. And then also, if you've got kind of like a global remit for fitting things together, as most large organizations have, it's good to have a service mesh in place. So if you think all the way back, I just laundry listed these things here, but you think all the way back to that blinking cursor that Kubernetes has, right? And building all this stuff on top of Kubernetes and setting it up in your organization so the developers have self-service access to it, so that it integrates together and fits to your policy, so that you have kind of custom access to like your ERP system and other things like that. That is this product that we're talking about when we think about platform as a product, right? You're thinking about your customers, developers, how can we make it best for them? So that's kind of the start, the end goal of what that platform looks like. And then next, let's look at if this is kind of like the end goal that you have, right? This is what you'll end up having and what you'll be supporting. How do you get to that point, right? How do you put together what I would call I use the word strategy for too many things, but how would you put together your platform as a product strategy, your platform strategy, your plan, your goals, your intentions, even the culture of it, how you're going to go about doing it? I always forget that I have a placeholder slide in there, but this guy kind of looks like me, and that could be a nice friend of mine. She's got a great little Bluetooth ear thing there. I used to really like those. The first one I had was like a little Jabra one, which was actually quite nice at the time. Boy, the industrial design on it was fantastic. So the first thing for your strategy, and I think this is kind of where we are now in most cases in the mainstream of large organizations, is building out this platform is largely a developer concern, or it's something that developers are spending a lot of time on. And I think part of the reason why I like to give this talk is because I often given the chance to give it to operations and infrastructure people. And I want to point out that this is the new way not only the new way, but one of the new things that they can be doing. This is a new set of skills, a new set of tasks, hopefully an interesting new sort of job for them to be doing. And I think it's especially important now because as we saw in the survey, we're seeing a lot of developers kind of struggling with building out that platform. Now, why is this bad, right? So if you go back to all of those things that a platform has, right? Like think about the tasks that a developer needs to do to build that out, right? There's a lot of planning that goes into it. You've got a lot of different options. Thankfully, there's all sorts of things in the Kubernetes ecosystem now, a lot more than there were even a few years ago. And many of them are at a good state of maturity, especially what we have in the Tanzu portfolio, the best maturity, I feel I must say. But there's a lot of options you have out there. So there's a lot of just planning and selection that will be going on. And then once you select all those things, you're going to need to integrate them. And you're also, if you think about, you don't just set this platform up once, right? Like you have to ongoing product management, add new things, not only install updates, but add new features that you have, new integrations, right? And That is a key part of the as a product part is, I mean, we've always had centralized platforms throughout the decades, right? And my theory about why they kind of go stale, well, I've said it right there, is that they stop getting updates, right? People don't work, teams don't work constantly on these internal platforms to make sure they're updated, every few months. I mean, annually is probably even too long, but every 6 to 12 months, they should have new features in them, the kind of the features and the services that people need, definitely integrations with the rest of the organization. You don't want to let your platform calcify. So that's another task developers have to take on. Not to mention there's also operating it, right? Like I think there's really only so much kind of like you build it, you run it, you want going on. And indeed what you find, from the Amazon world and the DevOps world is more of an SRE thing where like there's actually just a thin layer that you want your developers worrying about in production instead of everything else. And then finally, this is a hidden thing that developers don't really appreciate often, is that the funding becomes quite a problem, right? Application developers are funded to do applications. And so when it comes to funding that work and funding whatever fees you might have, whether it's running in public cloud or getting the software that you might need for it, getting that funding is going to be more difficult for application developers than you might think, especially in the out years, in the long term. And I think any operations person knows what eventually happens when developers build infrastructure is, to say they lose interest is a snarky way of putting it, but they want to pass it on to someone else to take care of it. And then, it's not your mistake, but now it's your problem as an operations person to take care of it. And funding will be one of the issues that you quickly encounter in addition to all of these other things. So it really is not a good idea to have developers, especially application developers, in charge of this. You might get some developers to be on your platform team, but this running a platform, it needs to start being what the operations, the infrastructure people do, what they have skills and responsibility for. Now, the next thing to think through, and sure, I'm biased working here from VMware, but I think what you'll find is that everyone has this advice, whether they want you to use an open source thing, a commercial thing, a public cloud hosted thing, whatever it may be. But the general consensus is that you should try to build as little as possible yourself, unless there's a situation that you need to. So there was an interesting talk from Mercedes at the KubeCon EU a while ago. And, they started off, I think it was about 5 years ago, and they ended up building a tremendous amount of the platform themselves. And they built up the competency for it. And now they have, I forget how many, but they have quite a few applications running on Kubernetes. But their situation was different 5 years ago, right? And they have a good engineering culture and they prioritize setting up a team to do all of this. Whereas nowadays, there's a lot of things off the shelf available that it doesn't really make sense to spend all of that time and effort building things on your own. But figure out how much time we can put into this, what's available to use. And I would start with the assumption that you're not going to build things totally on your own, and you're going to start with as integrated a thing as possible. Now, there's all sorts of components you can get to, right? Like you don't have to have a full-blown, fully integrated, ready-to-go thing like the Tanzu application platform and Tanzu Kubernetes for operators or for operations. I think it's for operators. I always get it mixed up. TKO, as we say, which makes me think of Mike Tyson's Punch-Out. I played a lot of that game, especially it was fun back in, is that 8-bit or 32? I don't remember. Anyhow, but, you can go all the way from just various components. Like I said, there's all sorts of components in the landscape out there. Something like Knative is an interesting architectural approach, but also a way of packaging together and configuring how applications run on a platform on Kubernetes. And really, if you want to go full blown and you don't really care so much about, if it's Kubernetes or not, there's lots of there's platforms as a service available like Cloud Foundry, which have been used for many years, that will give you, I think, like the ultimate platform as a service where you as an operations person don't really need to worry too much even about the container management underneath, and has a lot of things integrated there. And, also another option is looking at if we want to fully commit to a public cloud. Because really, when you look at a public cloud, that is a platform itself, right? Like all of the things, there might be a huge amount of things there, but it is a platform. Instead, if you don't have multi-cloud concerns or you're worried about that, you can kind of go into what a public cloud has as well. So you have options there. And again, I would just focus on assume that you're going to do as little building on your own as possible and scale back from there instead of building up to like realizing, oh, we should have had a more integrated platform at the top. Now, to emphasize this thing, the next part, the as a product part. So I've mentioned this several times already, but the next thing to think through is that you're going to be product managing this platform, right? As I mentioned, one of my theories is that one of the chief reasons that centralized platforms, from Java application servers to even some of the, to platform as a service things, to ERP things, all sorts of things like this, especially ERP platforms. The reason that developers kind of lose interest in them and they start to go off and build their own things, do shadow IT or rogue IT, as we used to say, or they figure out how they can use public cloud instead of the infrastructure that you're building, whether it's public cloud or not, is that those platforms became stale. And the reason that happened is because they were often built to specifications, to a set of service requirements the infrastructure and operations people had, to performance characteristics, compliance and security characteristics, to requirements. Now, in contrast to that, a product way of doing things is to figure out who your customers are, here developers, and of course you have other stakeholders like security people and things like that, but to treat the people who are using this software, this platform, as customers and study what it is they're doing, what they need, what you can do to help them improve. So you're product managing it just like a developer, just like those people in the kitchen were product managing the software and studying what people are doing. Now, product management is a very well understood practice. There's almost too much to read about it. So it's easy to go kind of look it up. I think if you've never really come across product management, there's a book, I think, if I remember, Effective Product Management, that's good. Reading a little bit of Lean Startup is a little helpful if you're in a large organization. But it basically goes through a cycle of studying what people are doing, figuring out a problem they're having, coming up with a theory of how you would solve that, coding or whatever it may be, deploying that, and seeing if it helped them out and going through it over and over again. So you're constantly discovering what it is people need and updating the software that you have. And I think once you get in this cycle of trying to make your customers, developers' lives easier, and also satisfying the stakeholders that you have, if you're sort of committed to this idea that we too have a cycle, a monthly cycle, maybe even a weekly cycle, where we're adding new features to this platform, and we've staffed ourselves and thought about things that way, I think you'll find that your platform has a lot more stability and longevity. People are using it, which is what you want if you're going to achieve those benefits all the way down to Kubernetes, right? If you've got 5, 10 different platforms, 5, 10 different ways of doing Kubernetes, you're going to lose out on a lot of the efficiencies of scales because you have so much variation. So you want to spend a lot of work making sure people are using your platform. So speaking of, the other part of putting together your platform as a product strategy is to think about how you roll it out. Now, this applies to, I think, any major change in IT, but it especially applies here, and I've seen this played out back with Cloud Foundry-based platforms, and I see this with Kubernetes ones as well in the past couple of years, is that, I think this is almost true. There's a little bit of jokiness to it, but whatever your ambitions are, when you're putting together your plans about what's going to happen over the next year, at least have that, right? As far as how many applications you're going to have, how big of a platform that is. Because it's probably going to be a lot smaller than you think it is. And if you actually are thinking, if you're too ambitious about that, you're going to set yourself up for failure at the end of this evaluation, and that's going to cause problems when you go into the next year. So what I mean by this is, if you're doing a large initiative, you're usually pressured. There might be some funding, a lot of time put into it, and you're pressured to have big outcomes at the end of your year, right? So you build up this business case, you start loading more and more things in so that the benefit, the outcome at the end is huge and is big, and it justifies this year or so of working. But instead, what I would really encourage you to do when you're trying anything new, but especially something like this, think about how different it is the way that you normally do your infrastructure work, is start small, right? Think in terms of 3 months and start with one application that you're going to deploy. I mean, that's a very important thing at the beginning, is have an application that you're going to deploy on this platform, right? Like, instead of just kind of standing up Kubernetes, even if you're only doing that, have an application in mind, at least one, if not two. And as you're building up that platform, putting that platform in place, also have like 1 to 3 applications and use those as a way to learn. Again, think back to how you're product managing it. You need a customer when you're building this out. You don't want to just build a platform without a customer. Otherwise, how do you know what you need, right? So start with one application, then kind of when you're successful with that, you've learned from it, you've kind of failed and learned from those failures. Go up to 2, then 3, and slowly but surely, as kind of these curves show, you go up that curve, right? And what I've seen, when you see people doing this, here's a timeline from the Home Depot, big American, as people would say in Europe, DIY store, or hardware store, as we would say in the States. You can see that ramp. It's a little slow it seems slow at first, but then once the organization learns, once you've built this platform mentality, you can scale up and you start to get those kind of direct business effects because you've been putting your application on top of that. Now, another aspect of why you start small, and just briefly mentioned it, is when you're starting with those initial teams, those initial 1 to 3 teams, what you'll do to spread knowledge of how to use that platform is you'll take some of the developers who worked on those first 1 to 3 application teams. They should be kind of personable and interested in helping other people. You'll take some of those key personnel and move them to new teams. So when you have your 4th and 5th application team, you can start to seed these developers who have experience doing this into other teams. Now, you don't have this opportunity to kind of spread that knowledge, to do that seeding, if you do everything all at once, right? If you do hundreds of applications at once, I mean, that's just not going to turn out well. And you won't get this benefit of seeding. And in I think it's last year's DevOps report, you can see a great study kind of showing that seeding is one of the top ways that good high-performing organizations spread this change through a large organization. So start small, right? Like, scale back your ambitions. Start small to get big success. I should come up with some catchy way of doing that. Now, just a couple more things here. It can be easy when you're starting, or it can be hard when you're starting off to kind of like not know exactly what to start with. And we just, me and 2 coworkers, or I and 2 coworkers, just published a white paper going over one of the techniques to help you, if you're product managing your platform, to start kind of to find what it is you can start working on to help developers, right? So there are all sorts of things, right, about just getting Kubernetes up and running, making sure it's secure. But at the beginning and ongoing, you can use developer toil audits to really start to pinpoint what should we work on? How do we prioritize what we should put into this platform that makes our customers, developers' lives easier? Now, this is a selection of the questions that's in the audit, but it's good to do this audit probably pretty frequently at first, but then maybe shift it back to like a 3 or 6 month thing. And it's, you can just use a Google form or whatever survey that you want. And it's not so bad to have, developers fill out like a 30 or so page audit. Like, I mean, it will help improve them. And once they see improvements, they'll be eager to start filling it out. But we have a methodology that you can check on in that white paper down there. And the canned survey questions you can start with. And the important thing is it will not only help identify what the problems are, but because of the way the survey is done with Likert scales, it'll allow you to have kind of a default way of prioritizing what's most important. And you can start to track the improvements that you've done. So this will give you a good bootstrapping sort of list of things to do, and then also help you ongoing pinpoint where you can have areas for improvement, the features, the product managing stuff that you're adding to the platform. So next, as I pointed out, security is a rising concern that people have with the platform. And I'm always cutely dismissive of security as like something to worry about, because of course it needs to be secure. Everyone's always worried about security. And I think the important thing is that when you look at Kubernetes and platforms here, it's now more or less understood how to get kind of a pretty good baseline of security, right? There have been a lot of organizations that care deeply about security who have the experience of figuring out and then securing Kubernetes and things above it. And, as an example, this is from the U.S. Army. It's a great little paper if you want to read through how they kind of, their standard of how you would secure Kubernetes and kind of apply DevSecOps as a process and thinking to a platform. But it's definitely possible to apply security to it. You just have to be mindful of that's something you need to be looking out for. And I would suggest checking out that paper for a kind of a start, a list of requirements of how to go through it. But again, that's going to be another major concern that you have that you want to start thinking about from the beginning. So then before I close out, the second to last thing I want to go over is that when you're doing platform as a product, you're going to be doing a lot more marketing than you probably realize, right? And of course, you're going to notify people that this platform exists. If you're doing product management, you're talking with developers. You might even have some training that you're thinking about that you're going to be doing, updating your internal websites. But you're going to need to do so much more internal marketing. You could almost think of it as platform advocacy that you're going to be providing. And what that means is if you think about us vendors and public cloud people, right, we spend a tremendous amount of time marketing the services and the products that we have, just telling people what it is and helping match up the solutions that we have, the software that we have, with problems that people have, even pointing out problems people may not realize that they have or that they're going to have, right? And kind of explaining and demonstrating and proving how this thing works, educating and training people. And what I've seen over and over again, and you can see a few organizations here, is that successful platform as a product strategies, the teams doing this, they dedicate at the beginning at least one person full time to being that platform advocate, to going out, whether it's literally or if you do things all online now, to getting together with people and not only giving them a presentation and training, but just spending time with them, being an advocate, as we used to say, an evangelist, but really kind of a platform, a developer advocate to help the developers out, to kind of not only tell them about the platform and help them understand it can help them, but also you get this great loop going where they are one of the people who gather feedback about what your customers, your developers are doing, and they can bring it back to the platform team as well. Now, it's also good to start establishing a brand around this, right? Like a name for what you have. And again, I want to emphasize, it's easy to kind of be dismissive of this, but I've seen this be important over and over again, that coming up with a name, a brand, I mean, however you need to go to whoever your brand and your visual, your graphic design sort of brand people are, and tell them that you want to come up with branding for this platform. And you can see some examples of it there from several companies, but you're going to want this brand around it for all sorts of reasons. But it's, you need a word that people start using, a way of capturing the culture and the process around these things. So that's the other thing to start thinking about, is how you're going to put in place this marketing effort, this platform advocacy effort. And indeed, I'm going to skip over this one slide. I never get to this one. I run out of time. But to give you one final example of this, right? So this is from a talk that we had at DevOps Loop this year from one of our friends at JP Morgan Chase. And they have a very mature platform as a product program in place. I forget how many years it is, but you can see as Nadi went over in that slide, they have all sorts of. Let me make a quick note here. I always need to make sure I pronounce someone's name right, because I am terrible at it. I mispronounce all sorts of just normal words all the time. Anyhow, they've had this in place, I think, for like at least 5 years or so. And they are such a large organization. I think they have, I don't even know how many developers, 20, 25,000, some huge amount, all sorts of applications. And they, in fact, have a handful of platforms in place for various reasons. But, they have a Kubernetes-based one, a Cloud Foundry-based one running the Tanzu application service. And you can see that they've got a great amount of momentum, a great amount of applications using this platform as a product approach. And in fact, if you want to check out that presentation, he goes over very similar to a lot of what I've talked about, kind of the principles that they found that are part of this successful, as he calls it, developer experience. That's another good phrase for it. But what the platform as a product team does, the things they focus on, that they focused on, kind of the tools that they use. And what's great about that, and just to reemphasize this point, is that the major shift occurring here, right? I mean, just to summarize at this point, is like you're probably thinking about putting Kubernetes in place, right? What you're going to get there is, again, you're going to get a great way of managing infrastructure, running your infrastructure, a standard for how you package, configure, even architect applications that are in your infrastructure. It'll give you great benefits, security, all sorts of great benefits, but just by being a new, cleaner way of being that, as they say, API or interface around how your infrastructure is chunked up. But you're just going to get a blinking cursor, right? And you need to build that platform on top of it. But then with building that platform on top of it comes this new way of thinking, this practice of thinking about your platform as a product and product managing it, thinking about your customers as developers. And you can see that JP Morgan Chase, that their group has discovered this as well, right? Gone over a lot of the things that I've mentioned here. And it's how they've gotten those successful numbers and how they're sustaining the platform that they have in place. So I would check out that talk for some kind of more reinforcement and a little bit more details about what this looks like. But that's the shift that if you are an infrastructure person, an operations person, I think this is, and you're doing something with Kubernetes, this is something that's definitely worth thinking about. And when I look at large organizations, how they're making sure that they kind of have that follow through with their Kubernetes plans to actually have it be successful for supporting the software that they have. So with that, I didn't really introduce myself, but hello, I'm Coté. I spend most of my time, I'm pretty lucky, I get to talk with and study large organizations, see how they're doing software, and kind of write about that, research it, kind of go through a loop of my own of doing things. There's a lot of podcasts that I do. Like I mentioned, there's reports that I write, books, things like that. I'm pretty easy to get a hold of if you're interested in talking more. All over the place here. So I also wanted to mention that if you're interested in that topic, we recently renamed VMworld to VMware Explorer, I think, which is a fun new name. But if you're interested in checking that out, it's coming up pretty soon, at the end of the month here, at the end of August. Right now, when I'm recording this, it's August 2nd. I've got a talk kind of similar, kind of on the same topic about is Kubernetes for developers or not. There's another talk going over kind of what cloud native is. It goes in more that I'm giving that's more in depth about what the application development cycle looks like. But there are hundreds of other talks that kind of go over the state of the art in infrastructure, what it means to run a platform, managing Kubernetes, all your traditional VMware based stuff. It's going to be a really great conference, so you should check it out. And if you want to browse the catalog, register for it, if you go to cote.io/explore or just search for VMware Explorer, you can go check it out there. And with that, thanks for checking in on this. We've got a little bit of time for questions, and we'll see everyone next time. Well, I think that's a pretty good practice there. Let's see, I ended at around 47:30. That's perfect. That fits right into the 45 minutes that I was targeting. And I think, one of the things I got to solve around here is maybe if I got a miniature fridge over here, which would be totally stupid, but I really got to get an ice machine. I miss having ice. We got a new refrigerator recently, which is great, but here in Europe, it's common. It's not the only way, but it's common to have a refrigerator without an ice machine. Unlike back in the States where you got to try pretty hard to get a fridge without an ice machine. Whatever. That's an old, boring complaint that I have. Well, anyways, if you're watching the stream all the way to the end here, we've restarted the old Tanzu Talk podcast. And so you can find out how to subscribe there if you go to tanzutalk.com. We moved hosting providers, so it's a little, I just went with the easiest thing so I didn't have to sign up a new vendor, and I'll do security reviews and audits and stuff for the one that I was using. So it's a little like not the best interface, but it does the job for podcast hosting. I don't know why I'm complaining. It's totally cool. But we've started that off to go back to kind of the format of doing weekly news and guest interviews and stuff. So definitely subscribe to that if you haven't, or if you've been missing the Tanzu Talk podcast. Also, if you want to get the show notes for this, if you go to tanzutalk.com, I put these recordings in the Tanzu Talk playlist. You can check it out there, and I'll go into the the YouTube description and put links in for, like that developer toilet paper and other things that I mentioned. And finally, I would be remiss. Let me bring this up. If you want to see the final version of this, let me put it in the chat here. If you want to see the final version of the webinar I'm giving later this week, I'm putting it in chat now, but you can actually go register for it. And, even if you're not going to watch it, you should just register for it. So you get a reminder and you'll see the like an email of the recording. And then also, like, people think it's super cool if you register for stuff. So you could do that. But you could go try that out. And then I'll put a link to that in the YouTube thing as well. Well, as always, I've been Coté, and I hope to still remain being them. And I'll see about having another sporadic live stream at some point. I have actually several more talks that I need to practice. They all kind of overlap and start to be like little slices of a 2-hour talk, but it's always fun to go through them. I'll see everyone next time. Bye-bye.